who I am and what I'm all about and where I stand on specific issues, and to hear what's on your mind as well. I mean, part of my view of service, of public leadership, is you don't just talk, you hear from people too, and hear what their concerns are. And I have to tell you, over the last 16 months or so, I've learned a lot. It's not just been my sharing with people how I would handle various issues or what my vision for the country is. It's been about learning what your concerns are, what your vision for the country is, and maybe what you would like to see in a member of Congress. So we're going to touch on all those different things tonight. Before I open it up for questions, which is how we're going to spend the next couple of hours, most of it is going to be hearing from you, and I'll respond to your questions or concerns or comment on these things. But before I get into that, let me tell you a little bit about myself. Now, who receives our email updates? Let's start with that. Okay, so a fair number of you. Well, I'll probably plow over some ground that you're already familiar with, but since not everyone gets them, first of all, you don't know that I'm the father of 4 children. If you do get our emails, you'll learn that a couple of weeks ago, my wife Jenny and I just went from 2 to 4 children. She had twins. And Jenny is my best friend and really kind of my teammate on this effort. It's not something you can do alone. But she's home taking care of our children right now. And Jenny and I like to think that because of those 2 births, now we have 2 more reasons to care about the future of this country. And I really believe that. We are running out of time to deal with some very consequential issues at the federal level of government. Issues that, frankly, if we don't get our hands around these things, budget issues in particular, then it's really going to put the American dream out of reach for our children, for our grandchildren. And none of us want that. Of course, in the near term, we need to get our economy moving again as well. And those 2 issues, fixing our economy and preserving the American dream for our kids and grandkids, is always foremost in my mind when I talk about issues with people. But really, I'm running for Congress because we've heard politicians address these sorts of issues in recent years. We've heard them talk about things that all of us care about, like fiscal responsibility and constitutionally limited government. But nothing really seems to change at the federal level of government. And I'm talking about both parties here. I, for one, happen to have been a little disappointed in our Republican Party in recent years and all the money it's spent, money we don't have, on things we don't need. So we'll talk about that some later this evening as well. I come from a military background. I spent a decade in the military. And the reason I joined the Navy out of high school is because in my family, service was always very important. I grew up here in Indiana in a family that emphasized good Hoosier values. Values of hard work, integrity, and service. My mother's a registered nurse. My dad sells commercial heating and cooling equipment. People work very hard, but they always found some time, not just for family, but to try and serve a cause a little greater than themselves, and than all of us here. And they instilled that ethic of service in me. So I jumped at a chance to join the Navy out of high school, enlisted in the Navy. After a year, I had a chance to attend the U.S. Naval Academy for college. I spent 4 years at the Naval Academy, graduated from there, and then joined the U.S. Marine Corps when I graduated from Annapolis. So that decade in the military taught me a lot about service as well. I regard political leadership as service too. And I think some of our members of Congress have forgotten it. It's about serving you and people like you. I'll never forget that should I earn your trust and support and end up in Washington. And I'll also never forget those many generations of Americans who have given so much to make this the land of freedom and opportunity, to keep it the greatest nation on earth. Let me tell you, before we get into the Q&A tonight, about one of those people. His name is Doug Zembeck, United States Marine Corps. Doug is I always put his service afterward because Doug takes being a Marine very seriously. But Doug and I went to the Naval Academy together. We were very good friends. And Doug was an All-American wrestler at Annapolis, a standout student, and just an altogether great guy. Doug was one of these people who you never questioned his integrity. He always stood on principle. So much so that when he joined the Marine Corps out of Annapolis, he just earned the incredible respect of the Marines under him. He was deployed to Iraq a few years back, and his men gave him a nickname. They called him the Lion of Fallujah. Now, gentlemen, if you have a nickname that you regard as somehow tougher than the Lion of Fallujah, please raise your hand. All right. No one's ever raised a hand. That's pretty impressive. Well, the Lion of Fallujah kept a journal when he was in Iraq, where he collected his thoughts on leadership, collected little pearls of wisdom from those he respected. And for me, what is in that journal is the essence of leadership. Pretty plain language, but within that journal are things like lead from the front. Don't forget where you come from. Serve your country. Serve a cause greater than yourself. That pretty much says it right there. Well, on May 10th, 2007, Major Doug Zembeck was killed in Iraq. He died for his country. He died for a cause far greater than himself. Now, Doug Zembeck left behind a wife he loved, a child he adored. And I think of Doug and his family quite a bit when I go around campaigning. I think of my children and our obligation to ensure that we pass on this legacy of freedom and opportunity to them. And I also look to the past. I look to those like Major Doug Zembeck and his family, those people who sacrificed so much to keep this the greatest nation on earth. And guess who's the link in that chain? All of us here. So we have a pretty solemn obligation as citizens to ensure that we do what we can to ensure that our elected officials are responsible people. People that are going to make the tough decisions, people that we can trust to serve our best interests and the best interests of posterity. And I have to tell you, I think that in recent years, we've fallen short. Republicans and Democrats. We spent all kinds of money we didn't have on things we didn't need. Our Republican Congress a few years back, to my mind, was the most fiscally irresponsible Congress in American history until this present Congress. We passed more earmarks in the year 2005 than were passed during the entire Clinton 90s. We added $1 trillion to our debt in just 2 years, 2005, 2006. And things, as we know, in the last 16 months or so have gotten a whole lot worse. And this $1 trillion stimulus package that stimulated nothing but debt to our children and grandchildren, a cap and trade bill that, should it pass the U.S. Senate, will require us to put closed for business signs around the border of southern Indiana. And then this health care legislation that, frankly, we're still sorting through. But it can't be good for the economy. It's actually going to bend the cost curve upward. It's going to impose a mandate, unprecedented in American history, for American citizens to go out and buy a product or service. We've never seen anything like this before. So if you get the sense that you're kind of losing control, if you get the sense that we're reaching a turning point in our nation's history, you're not alone. I think it's time to turn the page on the excesses of the recent past. This isn't a partisan campaign. For those who came here hoping that I would just be beating up on Democrats tonight, you're going to be sorely mistaken. Let me disabuse you of that. This is about America. This is about preserving all that we have and all that we should preserve. I am not a pessimist. I'm an optimist by nature. You almost have to be. But I'm a student of history, and if you look back, we've been through some very tough times before. I think of our first Republican president, that small-town attorney who grew up not far from here. After the Battle of Gettysburg, a very tough time in our nation's history, he stood before his fellow countrymen. Remember what he said in our school books. He said that this nation, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom. I love that phrase, a new birth of freedom. Well, my family's doing our part. We just had 2 new births. But I really believe that our nation needs a new birth of freedom. And for over 16 months now, that's been the message we've been delivering, and I've been really encouraged. People have been stepping up, joining our charge. I'm a first-time candidate. We've received the public support